most people, usually where do people tend to look for God's evidence and God's work and presence? People tend to look out for special events and grand things in their life. But the thing is, if we are only searching for God's hand in very special and grand events of our life, then the truth is we are going to find very little, or rather lesser, of God. Because come to think about it, how often do we get to encounter special things in our life? Maybe once in a while, once in a month is already very frequent. So more often, God and His work and presence is found in more ordinary life. Because often, for most of us, our living, it will appear to us that every day seems to be rather normal, rather ordinary. And so, if we look for God in the ordinary, we will tend to find more of God. Because why? God is actually working in every little detail of our life. But the thing, and the tricky thing about finding God in the ordinary is what? When it is in the ordinary, what does it mean also? That it is harder to notice. It is more invisible. It is harder to see. And that's why often we feel as if God is not around us because we don't pay enough attention to seek out God's doing in our life. But as we read in the responsive reading just now, our God is what kind of God? Our God is a God who can do immeasurably more than all we can ask for. And this is the truth that we are going to affirm through today's message. And for some of you who have come from the 7:30 service, you may not be aware that every time when I preach for the 5 p.m. service, I'll be preaching from a book in the Bible, chapter by chapter. Pastor, he will do the topical preaching, but for me, we will go through the books of the Bible. And we have just finished the book of Genesis, and now we just started on the book of Exodus. And today we are on to chapter 2 of Exodus. And this is where we're going to look at today. I think it's a very familiar story for most of us if you have been a Christian long enough and if you have attended Sunday school. But may God give us new insights as we look again into what He has to tell us through this story today. So Exodus chapter 2 verse 1. Now a man of the tribe of Levi married a Levite woman. And we know this is, why did the Bible record even this line? Because this is a very important background and family history of who? Moses, a very key figure in the Old Testament. And so we realize later on that this background is a very right background for Moses, because Moses, if you know the history of Israel and of the Bible, he will be sort of like a representative between man and God, between the Israelites, the people of God, and God. And so Moses, from this verse, we know that he's a full Levite. Full meaning his father is a Levite, his mother is also a Levite. And as we read from the Bible, we know this tribe of Levi is very special because God has called them to be His holy priests. And so we notice that, when God calls a person, when God calls you and me, even our family background, our conditions, everything about us, all our qualities matters. There's a reason to why we come from a certain family background. There's a reason to why we have certain qualities in us. And so God plans everything beautifully. In verse 2, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket. Now this basket, the word basket is a very interesting term. In English, we cannot see how interesting it is. But if you look at the original language, the Hebrew, this basket can also be translated as the word ark. And so when you think of ark, what does it come to your mind? The ark that saved Noah and all his family members when the flood came. So this same ark will also save baby Moses when he was being put into the river later on. So there's certain meaning to this. And then so she got this basket and then for the baby and coated it with tar and pitch. And what's that for? Tar and pitch is to make the basket waterproof. And then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds among the banks of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. And then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the river bank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her female slaves to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying, and she felt sorry for him. This is one of the Hebrew babies, she said. Now, this is very interesting. She knew this is not a baby from her own nationality. She knew, it's very obvious from the color of the skin, maybe the dressing, the clothes. But the question we need to ask is this by chance that, the Pharaoh's daughter just got compassion for this baby? We need to ask the question, who was the one who softened the princess' heart? And why was this princess so different from her cruel father? Her father sent an order, if you recall chapter 1, the Pharaoh sent an order to the whole kingdom that every Hebrew baby must be killed. So why this daughter was so different from her father? And what gave her the courage to offend and go against her father? And so we know, if you are Christian, we know God is working behind all these scenes to make this happen. Then verse 7. Then his sister asked the Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. So the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. In verse 10, when the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water." Even this name is interesting. The father, the Pharaoh, ordered all Hebrew baby to be thrown into the water. But the daughter saved this child out of the water. And so we see that the birth of Moses was described here. And why was this birth of Moses so significant? Because we know the role that Moses is going to play in future. He's going to be a deliverer of Israel for God's people. But then, even though Moses has such a huge role to play in future, right now, all we read is what? A crisis. So there's certain threat, and this is what the evil one is always doing. Now, when something is important, or when somebody is very important, especially if that person or that thing will serve the purpose of God's kingdom, do you think the devil will sit idle and do nothing? So oftentimes, whether it is Moses or even for we ourselves, when we make a commitment that we want to follow God, we want to carry our cross, we want to live our life for God, the devil will be there to, shake our conviction. The devil will be there to sabotage us. The devil will be there to give us a lot of things to distract us, just so that we cannot fulfill God's purpose. And so here, in the same way, right from the beginning, even in the Old Testament, we saw that even before Moses can start doing anything to fulfill his grand calling by God, there is this crisis that he may not even be able to live. And so we see that it's not just killing of a person or of a baby. The evil one had in mind the huge ploy to destroy God's work, to destroy the blessings to God's people. But the good news for us Christians is what? We need to really understand the nature of crisis. God allow crisis to happen is because every crisis is in fact meant to impress upon us the surpassing greatness of God. Now, you recall all the crises that you have gone through in your life. Do you realize what happened during all the dreadful crises and challenges that you went through in your life? It is precisely during those crisis moments that we realize we rely more on God, right? We have no choice. We run out of all the options and we rely more on God. It is during crisis that we are humbled down to call out to God more. And it is also during crisis that God has the opportunity to demonstrate to us just how great He is, just how much power, how wise He is, that just how no possible problems can, defeat God. And so crisis serve its purpose. And that's why today, in this short account, you will see that this short story is not just a Sunday school story, but it is sprinkled with a lot of traces of God's protection and God's providence. And so here we see three amazing developments. And so what's the first amazing development? First is, just like I mentioned, the Pharaoh, he not just ordered one person to kill all the Hebrew babies, but he ordered his entire kingdom. So there's many people, who are policemen searching for Hebrew babies, Hebrew male babies. But despite that, the first amazing development is Moses could be hidden not just for 1 week, 1 month, but for 3 months. So this is really, of course we say that newborns, they always sleep. But baby will cry, right? So sometimes they will cry, and then it's very hard to cover their crying. But despite this, no one actually found out about the presence of Moses, and no one actually reported it to the authorities. So Exodus chapter 1 verse 22, if you recall, there is this verse that the Pharaoh ordered that every Hebrew male babies that is born, you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. And so, as I mentioned, so many eyes are watching. And you know the Egyptians, they do not really like the Israelites because they feel very threatened by the increasing numbers of the Israelites. So we see that this Moses could be protected from being found out. The only reason is because of God's protection. But then still, it has come to a point, 3 months is up. And then the parents realized they could no longer hide the baby anymore. Maybe as the baby grows bigger, the cries get louder and louder. It's getting harder to stop the baby crying. Or for whatever reason, it's getting hard to hide the baby any longer. And so Moses' parents have to pack the baby in a basket and send him away. Now just imagine, if you are the parents, how would you feel? Sometimes, even in our own life, when we face certain crises and we exercise some faith, and then we see, that our faith actually paid off because we saw God protecting, God giving evidences, and God showing us the fruit of our faith. Just as what? Just as Moses' parents for the last 3 months, they have practiced faith, and perhaps in their heart, they may have this secret wish because they say, oh God, we trusted in you. For these 3 months, everything is clear, everything is safe. You have guarded our baby, you have performed the miracle. So a normal person in their heart will of course, continue to hope, God, perhaps you can miraculously just make this problem disappear. Maybe I can keep my baby for more than 3 months and longer than that because you have shown me the past 3 months' fruit. So sometimes along the way in our own living also, when we trust God in one area of our life for a certain period of our life, and we saw how God honor our faith in Him and give us the answers we want, we really imagine, perhaps all our problems can disappear. But the thing is, we often encounter what? When we pass one test of faith, another test will come. So now it has come for a time to let go of baby Moses. But so no matter how much the parents, couldn't bear to part with their baby, they still must release them into the river. Now, release them into the river means what? To the believer, releasing the baby into the river is not just a random thing. But releasing baby Moses into the river means I have to release this baby into the providence, into the care, into the protection of God. But one thing interesting that we need to notice from the behavior of Moses' parents is what? Is that despite the grim situation, what the parents did was they still tried their very, very best to protect their baby. So what did they do? Just now we read, they tried to waterproof the basket, and they placed the basket where? They placed the basket among the reeds. There's a lot of thought being put into placing the basket among the reeds. Why? Because the reeds will stop the basket from being carried away by the water current. So the reeds will prevent as much as possible the baby from drowning. And then the reeds can also maybe protect the baby, camouflage the baby more, so that the baby won't be found out so easily. Or it can also shield the baby from the hot sun. The plant can provide some shade. So there is much thought given to how to protect the baby as much as possible. So this brings us to this thought about humans' action versus the reliance on God's help. So a famous Christian writer ever said this thing, that from the story of Moses being sent to the river, there is this beautiful connection. It's the next quote. There is this beautiful connection between what? Between a diligent use of means and a pious trust in providence. So instead of sitting down in sullen despair or passive dependence on divine interposition to do all the work, everything is done which can be done by human agency. Okay, so what this whole chunk of things means is We always think that, okay, God, we need to trust you, we need to depend on you. Humans, we cannot control a lot of things. But there needs to be a beautiful connection between diligently using what God has given us. Now, God has given us wisdom. God has given us the resources. God has given us gift. God has also given us different means to carry out certain work. And so we cannot just simply be lazy and say, oh God, everything depends on you. We just piously look to you and pray and do nothing. So here is exactly what the parents of Moses did. What did the parents do? Moses' parents did what they could to protect their son. But when they are doing what they could, Moses' parents are not doing that with a dependence on themselves. They are not trusting their basket and the waterproof that they have given to the basket. They're not putting their entire trust there. But nonetheless, they do whatever they can within their means. And all this while they knew that in their heart, they are very clear. They could do what they did only by the grace of God. And the outcome is also in the hands of God. And so a Christian is like this. We do what we can from all the resources that God has given us, and we commit the outcome to Him rather than being lazy and sit there and just pray and do nothing. But at the same time, we know that everything depends on God. Everything depends on God's will and God's providence. And so the parents did everything they could. But yet, humans are still limited, right? So when they come to a point where they could do nothing anymore, they just commit the matter fully into God's hands. Now, this is a question we need to ask ourselves. Every time when we are faced with challenges of life, is this how we approach life? Do we do everything we can? And even in the midst of doing the best we can, we're not just trusting our own strength, but we trust God's strength. But we do everything we can, we do our best, but when there's nothing much for us to do anymore about a situation, perhaps about a strained relationship with someone, we try our best to apologize, to make peace, to be nice, but still the person doesn't accept that apology. But it doesn't mean, God, I cannot change people's hearts, so therefore I don't do anything to apologize, to please the person. But we do everything we can about a situation. But there could be occasions where, despite trying all we can, despite praying everything we could, the things are still stagnant. The situation is still stale. But when that situation comes, then we really need to commit the outcome to God. Can we really cast all our worries, all our desires to God and trust Him fully? And this is a question we need to ask ourselves. And then the second amazing development. So the first is Moses was able to be kept hidden for 3 months. Second amazing development is what? That Moses was found and then adopted by this Egyptian princess, Pharaoh's daughter. Now, I'll ask you a question. Do you think it's something good that baby Moses is found by the princess? Do you think it's something good? A lot of mixed feedback. Even when I read out commentaries, there's different feedback. So if you are the parent, would you be happy that, wow, this baby was found by royalty? Now, because we all know the ending of the story, so of course we may feel it's good that this baby was found by this princess and then he can live a nice, comfortable life in the palace. But actually, I think it's more likely that if you're the parent, you would rather not hope for any Egyptian to find this baby, right? Because in case that Egyptian is very law-abiding, when the Egyptians see this Hebrew baby, the Egyptian is bound to kill the baby. So naturally, the parents, maybe they don't hope that the baby be found by anyone, much less by any Egyptian. And so perhaps the parents' plan, we don't know, the Bible didn't say, but perhaps the parents' plan is we just hide the baby among the reeds. And maybe even the sound of the reeds may cover the baby's noise, so that maybe at night when no light and no one around, we can go and nurse our baby. And hopefully when he grow up, you can pretend that he's a grown boy. I don't know. But the thing is, he was found eventually, and by an Egyptian, and somehow by the Pharaoh's own daughter. Now, of course, some commentators think that the parents don't want the baby to be found, but some commentators, they see they were of the view that maybe Moses' parents planned it in such a way that, they deliberately placed the baby where this princess will shower so that this princess will adopt him. But I don't really think so, because I think based on common sense, you would imagine that someone from the same household of the Pharaoh will share the same sentiment as the Pharaoh. So why would any parents risk, letting their baby be in contact with Pharaoh or his household members? But whatever the case, what is amazing here is the baby was found by the princess, and the princess actually had compassion on the baby and adopted this baby. So this is the amazing turnaround, because from here we notice this unimaginable reversal. What reversal? There's a lot of wonderful reversal that we can observe here, and without God's providence and intervention, all this can never happen. So certain things have been reversed. The Pharaoh's plan was totally messed up by God. How? Because who would think that, the person to spoil the father's plan turns out to be his very own daughter? No one in the right mind or in all wisdom will imagine that, of everyone, the one who betrayed me is my own daughter. And another irony that we can observe is what? Is that the baby that Pharaoh aimed to kill ended up being a royal household member. And not just that, not just was baby Moses not killed, but also he got to enjoy all the royal privileges, protection, and training right in the palace of the very person who ordered his death. So this is so amazing, right? I mean, you just come and think about it. In other words, what had God actually done? God actually made Pharaoh fed, train, and groom his own enemy. And all this time, the Pharaoh was not even aware of this. And just now, I think just now I didn't read, but Acts chapter 7 tells us that Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And so we see that the amazing development is God not just saved Moses from death, but God was actually preparing and training Moses for the work that God had called him to do in future. So naturally, if Moses, you just imagine Moses in future, what was he going to do? He has to lead the vast people of Israel. Sometimes when we are called to lead the Sunday school class or a team of staff at work or wherever, we already felt the headache of having to lead a few people who likes to complain, a lot of different suggestions, a lot of different needs and demands. When we deal with sinners, it's sometimes quite a headache. Different people have different needs and personalities and so on. And so, of course, if Moses one day he has to lead the whole people of Israel, definitely he needs some training. And so from here, when God sent Moses for a period of time to be educated in Egypt, that also tells us something about worldly education and Christians. So it really means that, it doesn't mean that Christians must refrain from all worldly education, because we also know that even as Christians, even though we have the wisdom from God, we also need the common revelation, the common wisdom which God bestowed mankind in general. So things such as science, economics, leadership and management skills, all these are what we can also learn through earthly means, so that eventually we can also serve God. Because even though these are the common things and knowledge that we learn from the world, ultimately we know that even the good things of worldly education, where does it come from? It comes from God himself. And that's why the students here, we go to school, we study. And so when Moses was educated in all the wisdom of the Egyptian, that also tells us that while Christians, we don't need to reject all worldly education, the important foundation for us is, as we are in awe of the world's wisdom, we really need to check our heart, not to just be awed by worldly wisdom, not just to rely on worldly knowledge, but at the same time, deep in our heart, we know we need to pursue the deeper wisdom, which is the understanding of God. And so this is the second amazing thing. God flipped everything around. God changed and God frustrated all the ploys of the Pharaoh. And if by now you're still not that amazed yet, I think the third amazing development may sweep you off. And what is that? That Moses' own birth mother was actually paid to do the very thing she will love so much to do. You let her do it for free. It's already her desire. But now the best part is she's being paid by the princess to do the very thing she will love to do, and that is to nurse her own baby. And so the wonderful thing now is she can do it in open. She don't need to hide her baby anymore. She can publicly care for her baby, and even God got paid for that. And if God is not the one to intervene in all this, this couldn't happen. All this series of events couldn't happen and fall in place so beautifully. And how do you think the young sister of Moses at her age, I mean, the Bible didn't tell us her specific age, but it should be a very young age, that she has the courage to stay calm, when the baby was found by this Egyptian princess, that she didn't panic, and she on the spot, she also have the wisdom to make a beautiful suggestion. Shall I get a Hebrew nanny for you to nurse this baby? And of course, naturally, she will find the Hebrew nanny to be her mother. And so all these things is because God is giving the opportunity. God give the wisdom to the little girl. But what is more amazing about this third development about the mother being paid is not that she get money for nursing her son. The more amazing thing is what? Is that surely as Moses' mother nursed him, what will she do? Definitely this mother will teach her son about the God of Israel. This mother, while she's nursing her son, she will surely teach him about God's promises, God's truth, God's covenant. And that is the most amazing thing. Back in those days, typically, I know nowadays people breastfeed for maybe 6 months, 1 year maximum, and then you have to go back to work. But back in those days, the mother can nurse the children roughly for 3 to 4 years. Then they got weaned. And so 3 to 4 years is quite a sufficient time during the formative years of a child, to shape his belief, to imprint upon him all the important truth of life. And so this is exactly what we believe that Moses' mother, the Levite woman, would have done. And then that's why later on, when you read Moses' story, you will realize that Moses, he's aware that he's the Hebrew. And when he saw people bullying the Hebrews, he got angry and then he even killed someone. How did he know all this? Because since young, when the mother was nursing him, she already inculcated into him the Christian, or rather back then it's not Christian, but the belief in God, God's promises, God's plan. And so here we see this amazing thing about how God directed the chain of events. So a dying baby, but suddenly he became a prince, and then he lived comfortably in the palace. And another interesting fact is what? If you recall, the Pharaoh's original command is what? To kill all the Hebrew babies, not just like that. Only the male babies. So in the Pharaoh's mind, he's thinking what? Women are quite safe. Female are quite safe. The females cannot be a threat to me. I just kill all the men. These women, even in future, these female babies grow up to be women. What can they do to my kingdom? So his belief is that. But amazingly, we see another way by which God outwitted humans, even the king. So in this short story, we see that 3 women, they were instrumental in saving Moses, right? Moses' mother, Moses' sister, and the Pharaoh's daughter. And what's interesting about these 3 women is, these 3 women, they are all of different ages. The mother, the sister, the Pharaoh's daughter, different ages, and they have different social status. One is very high ranking, the other are just commoners. And they also have different religion, different faith. But the amazing thing is what? God can use all of them. God can use different people in our various conditions. Sometimes we thought, God can only use Christians to serve his purpose. Interestingly, the Pharaoh's daughter is not even a believer. But God, in his plan, in his sovereignty, he can use any condition, any qualities, any type of person. So when we see this, and when we read this, how can we ever still have this excuse, God, I don't have this quality, I don't have that quality, I'm not like this, I'm not like that, so therefore you cannot use me. None of our qualities can restrict God from using us to serve His purpose. God only looks for a willing heart to be used by Him. And so we see through all these three amazing developments, one thing about God, that God is really a God of surprises. You may think that you have known God enough. Maybe you have encountered much grace of God in your life. You have been saved by God before. God has amazed you before, but you realize that He never amazed you enough. Just when you thought you have understood God the best already, you already know God's power to be this level, He can amaze you again. So God, as what the Bible told us, He can indeed do immeasurably more than all we ever ask for or imagine. But the thing is, when we read this Bible, some of you may be thinking, why am I drawing the connection back to God? Because if you look at Exodus chapter 2, 1 to 10, what we have read just now, it seems like the Bible is only recording all the actions of human beings. The mother, the sister, the Pharaoh's daughter, right? If you look at the verbs in these 10 verses, you will see that all these action verbs describe the actions of the humans, right? The mother hid. The mother put the baby in the basket. The sister stood at a distance. The Pharaoh's daughter opened the basket. So it's all like describing human actions. Just like sometimes in our ordinary and normal living, we also feel like as if we are the one doing everything. I'm the one who report to work at 9 o'clock. I'm the one who take care of my baby at night. I'm the one who, answer my boss when things happen. I'm the one who got scolded by the customer, whatever. So sometimes, we always, in ordinary circumstances, it's not so obvious how God is involved. All we see is human action. What I say, what I do, how was I being treated. And so when things are successful, the common human tendency is what? Is we credit ourselves. Because all we see is, I'm the one who is make the wise decision. I'm the one who follow through. I'm the one who abide by certain regulations. So when things go smooth, we tend to credit ourselves. And when things are tough, we also tend to what? Pity ourselves. I'm the one suffering alone. Nobody's with me. Nobody understands. My husband is sleeping. My children don't understand. God is don't know where. I cannot see God. So human tendency, we tend to be like this. We tend to focus on humans. But the second point I want to bring out is, although God was not being explicitly mentioned here in this account, in this text that we have read just now, the truth is God is really working faithfully but quietly in the background. And God preserved a deliverer for Israel to train Moses in the best place at that time, which is Pharaoh's royal palace. And so here we read about God and His work. And when God works, God is not so narrow-minded. In this grand work of God, He's not merely only saving a baby from a family. He's in fact saving a deliverer of a whole nation to deliver the whole people of God, the whole Israel in future. And so in this scenario, we see that by God's hidden hands, He has actually turned a crisis into hope and deliverance. And so sometimes we also need to reflect upon our lives, because this story truly represents what we often view our lives sometimes, because often in our own life, it also seems as if God is not in the foreground. Because just like I mentioned, we seem to be the one working hard. And even when we look around and we feel we receive some favors, often our eyes only notice who are the human beings that are nice to me. Or it is my boss who appreciate me. It is my husband who take care of me. It is my child that brings me joy. We only see, the human agents that even when we receive nice things, people are kind to us, we tend to only realize that this comes from the nice people around us. But God seems to be out of the picture. But what does the Bible tell us? The Bible says that every good and perfect gift comes from our Father in heaven. And so without God, in fact, none of all this protection, none of the good things in our life will happen, will come to us. So we really need to battle against this common thinking of Things just so happen like that. Things just happen by chance. I just happen to have a nice boss. I just happen to marry the right person. I just happen to have a very good baby that sleeps through the night that never disturbed me. It just so happened. There's no such thing as it just so happened, because by God's sovereignty and in His plan, everything goes as He directed. The problem is we are often unaware of God's involvement. But we not knowing doesn't mean God is not doing. So in fact, God is always constantly working quietly behind the scene to what? To make all things work for the good of those who love Him and who trust Him. So what is our part? God will never fail to be faithful. Whether we notice or not, you realize God never stopped working. Even if we didn't realize He's working behind the scene, He is still working behind the scene. But what is it on our part that we should then do? All we need to do is to pause and confirm that God's hidden hand is really in the affairs of our life. Even the world has this saying, right? We need to stop and smell the roses sometime. The roses always have this nice smell, but when we just pass it by too quickly, we didn't even realize the nice thing is there. Same thing for God. God is always working in the background, protecting us from things that we may even be unaware of, protecting us from the schemes of the evil one, guarding our hearts, and planting a lot of grace in our path. But if we didn't pause to reflect, to confirm, we will miss out noticing His grace. Just for the account of this Moses' birth and how he's being adopted by the Pharaoh's daughter, if a person is to quietly sit down and think through the whole list of account, you realize it cannot happen by coincidence. How can things fall in place so neatly, so nicely to fulfill God's plan? It cannot, because random things won't fulfill God's purpose, won't fulfill God's plan. And so we need to pause and confirm God's doing in our life. And so that brings me to the next point. If God's providence is faithful, then it demands our unwavering faith. So why did the Bible tell us this story about Moses' birth? It's not just to give us a knowledge. Moses was born and that was the circumstances of his birth. No, the Bible tells us this story is so that we realize God's power is so dependable. So if you were to use one word to describe God's power, it is dependable. It's sufficient to save. It is enough for us. And so if God's power is so dependable, it makes any trace of unbelief deserving of rebuke. And I don't know whether, when you read this story, maybe different people read this story at different seasons of your life. But sometimes, when a person reads this story just now, you may be wondering, if God can do so amazing things, why are we so silly to still hold on to our worries and our little faith? So the problem is always our faith is too small, not God's power is too little. But some people, when they hear this, they will say, we cannot help it, what? My faith is just so small. I cannot help it that my faith is so small. I don't know how many of us mention or give this feedback before, I know I need to have faith, but I cannot help it. My faith is just very small. But yes, that may be the case. Our faith may not be big enough. But the question we need to ask ourselves is, then what are you doing about your little faith? Are you going to let the little faith remain small and always easily shaken by the world and so that we become an easy prey for the devil? I find it funny because sometimes when a person knows they are lacking in money, for example, if they say, I have very little money in the bank, they will start to think of many ways to earn money. Recently, I just had a talk with my mom about my family members, my extended family members. So some of them I know they are not that highly educated. But my mother was telling me how much they are earning through what means. Then I got so surprised. Wow, nowadays people, in order to get more and more money, they are so creative, to get sufficient money. But the funny thing is, when people have not enough money, they think of all kinds of means to make their money grow. Because they just refuse to remain in a state where their money is not enough. But when it comes to spiritual things, very funny. People just very happy and pleased and satisfied to say things like, My faith is very small, full stop. And you're happy with that. You're contented with that. And you just live with it. It's very strange. Money things, we are not satisfied to remain at that level. But spiritual things, we are very happy, It's a very happy excuse or reason. And just whoever tell me anything, I just reply, my faith is not enough, so I cannot evangelize. My faith is not enough, so I cannot battle the sin. My faith is not enough, so I cannot, so on and so forth. So this is something we really need to ask ourselves. So if anyone says that their faith is small, at least the right thing to do is, at least we hope to grow our faith, to boost our faith. And one way to boost our faith is to read the Bible. It sounds like, read the Bible. But the thing is, when you read today's story, don't you think that sometimes when our faith is small, or when our faith is dropping, and we read accounts like this again, suddenly our faith got revived that, we are reminded that God can do the impossible. We are reminded that God can surprise us. We are reminded not to just be deceived by circumstances. We are reminded to keep trusting God. And so, if anyone says that, it's too hard for me to learn faith because I always don't have faith, and my personality is always very easily shaken by circumstances. Even if someone says so, I want to remind you that the Bible tells us one encouraging thing, that even the last can become the first. So even we keep saying, I've been a sleeping Christian all my life. I've been shaken by circumstances all my life. I've been relying on my feelings all my life. It's too late for me to learn the lesson of faith. Who says so? The Bible gives us this wonderful encouragement that not until the last moment, you never know. So even the last, even the one with the least faith, even the sleeping Christian, if today you wake up and you say, God, I want to pray. I don't want to be a sleeping Christian forever. I don't want to be always shaken by circumstances forever. I don't want to always rely on my feelings forever. And so from the moment you wake up and you say, yes, God, I want to believe in you. I want to trust you. I want to get serious with my faith and in living by faith. From then on, you have the hope of the last being the first. And so when you start to pray in faith again, God will show you that He is real and He will answer your prayer in the best way. So the point is, don't get discouraged too fast, because God says, if your heart is right, even the last can be the first. And so finally, the last point for today is, God, being faithful, He will surely reward everyone who trusts in Him. Just now we read in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 23, that by faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born, because they saw he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. Now, someone may just think, it's very common, it's very natural for parents to protect the child. What's the big deal, right? Why did the Bible even commend this? Any parent in the right mind will try to protect the child, right? But here, the Bible is very clear that Moses' parents did what they did, not just because Moses was their child, not just because of parental instinct, but the Bible was very clear. They did it out of faith in God. And because of their faith in God, they were not afraid of the Pharaoh, and they feared God more. I mean, certainly, the parents knew the potential consequences of hiding the baby, right? Because Pharaoh could kill them and could even kill their whole family. But despite that, what does it mean that they were not afraid of the king and they have faith in God? It means that though they most likely are aware of the consequences, but they are even clearer of the fact that whatever the Pharaoh could do, the Pharaoh could not do anything to stop God's plan. If it is God's plan to do something, however mighty the Pharaoh was, the Pharaoh couldn't stop. So I believe this is in the faith of Moses' parents. And Moses' parents would believe what? Whatever Pharaoh could do to their body, the Pharaoh would not be able to do to their soul. So that's why they rather trust God than to give in to their fears and to the threats imposed by human, even rulers. Now, some people say, wow, Moses' parents, they are so brave. Nowadays, got all these COVID rules, we are so afraid of laws and whatever. But this, I don't believe it just comes from their courage. It is purely by faith, because faith can make a person courageous. I mean, how many of us has been rather timid? We dare not do a lot of things, but in certain occasions, for the sake of faith, God give us the courage. And so we realize that the fear of God will make a person fearless of other things. This is something for you to confirm. I believe it's not the first time you hear this phrase, but this is something for you to confirm. When a person fears God, in fact, he has nothing much to fear anymore because God is on his side. And God is a God of reversal. If anyone wants to harm us, who can be against the one who has God on his side? So if we fear God, what else do we need to be afraid of? And so we see that on the other hand, so although I mentioned, fear of God makes a person fearless of other things, we realize the opposite is also true. When a person is not afraid of God, he's afraid of the most silly things. Look at Moses' parents and the Pharaoh. Who do you think have more reason to fear? Moses' parents, they are just very humble, helpless migrants in the land of Egypt. But the Pharaoh, he's the top guy of his whole kingdom. And Pharaoh was there very fearful. He was the king of the land and he was so fearful of a few migrants in his land. And so the fear of God determines everything. Fear of God makes a person courageous, not afraid. But when the person don't have the fear of God, even if he holds the highest authority in the land, he's still gripped by fear. And so the Bible, of course, every one of us, we are fearful of something, right? I cannot say that, Christians, we also don't fear of anything. Every one of us in life, there's bound to be certain things we are afraid of. But the Bible tells us what is the best kind of fear. The most blessed and wisest fear is, of course, to fear God. Because why? God will surely have mercy on those who fear Him. So today, after reading this story, perhaps some of us, we may feel we are in a situation like Moses' parents, where we are faced with a hard decision to submit to man or to submit to God. Or we are faced with a hard situation. There's a life and death threats or challenges in our life. So when we are in this situation and when we read this account in the Bible today, I think God wants to encourage us that we must not give in to the fears imposed upon us by our circumstances. Today we read about God saving Moses miraculously. A similar thing happened in the New Testament also, if you can recall, because when Jesus was a baby, also the king of the land, King Herod, ordered to kill the babies, right? But God also preserved Jesus, baby Jesus. God preserved baby Moses to save his people Israel. But God preserved baby Jesus to save his covenant people. That includes you and I. So God will not let anyone spoil his plan. And so when we read about all these things, what we need to be encouraged is the God whom we worship is a God that we can trust. Because while it's impossible for men to do anything, like for Moses' parents' case, it's impossible for them to do anything. While the forces that are against them is tough forces, is the highest authority in the land. And when God's people seem so defenseless, what remains true is God's power will never be defeated. So I want to end by saying that God's providence, God's amazing work, and even God's hidden work is still present with us today. But what we really need to do is to stop, confirm, and follow His guidance. Don't give up too early. Don't say that, I can never have faith too early, because God will work in us to sanctify us and make us grow in faith. And so with that, let's go to God in prayer. Lord, we want to thank you for reminding us once again that you are a God who can do far more than what we imagine or ask. So Lord, we pray that you help us not be confined by our little faith, by our limited human wisdom. But Lord, we pray that the more we know you, the more we can trust you. And every time when we read such texts from the Bible, Lord, you help us appreciate your word more, because your word indeed have the power to revive our faith. So Lord, today I pray that you open all our eyes to see your hidden but sure providence and work and presence in our life. And when we see it, we pray that you help us cherish it and obey your will. And I pray all this in Jesus Christ's name. Amen.